Hello there and welcome back to Valdis story. Last time we left off with returning to Ishk and finding out that it had started to freeze over. And I left us with the question of whether or not we would save it in time. And then immediately answered that by saying no, because after all we want to see what happens if we don't. We already saw what happened when we saved it as Reyna after all. And today we're going to be trying out one of Vladyn's new weapons, the Doombringer. It's essentially a demonic rocket launcher and it's kind of cool, or should I say hot. Anyway, we'll get to check out its use soon enough. For now, we want to make sure we're as strong as possible before we proceed onwards. And for that reason we're picking up Mana Charms. It's only a 10% boost per, but that 10% helps. Not to mention, if we do fail to save Ishk, we might not be able to purchase that anymore, so we gotta get on it while the going's good. And in lieu with that, we are also returning to Tagram. Not to suggest that anything bad may happen here at any point. Just saying that we should probably purchase whatever we're interested in now, just to be on the safe side. And because of that, I'm picking up another Rogue's Cowl. We need these for upgrading certain armor sets, and I want to be able to make sure that I can max out a certain one. Oddly enough, an armor set that I kind of talked down earlier, the Murderous Raiment. I had forgotten just how much stuff you have available to use as a luck build. Not just magic, but you also get good damage out of melee weapons, both in terms of base damage and crit damage. I think we have something like a 60 to 70% crit chance, so even if we're not getting crits all the time, we're getting them pretty damn often. Almost makes up for the fact that we're constantly dying. Praise be to Valdis, without her, we would not be saved. But yeah, because the Murderous Raiment provides bonuses both for critical focus damage and magical focus damage, and even ties them together since you get a bonus to your magic damage every time you score a critical hit, I figured it would be pretty good to rely on that as our primary armor, which is why I wanted to upgrade it as high as possible, hence picking up those Rogue's Cowls. So current destination is the Ziggurat, and we are taking the path up from Tagram to reach there. On the way, getting lucky enough to pick up yet another lucky coin, or ancient coin rather. It's kind of funny how, if you're not on a luck build, you basically never get any of these, other than the 3 that you're allotted in fixed positions. But if you're a luck build, you get so many that you really don't have anything to do with them all. Because at most, you're probably going to pick up like 1 or 2 accessories. The assist we came across earlier, Abyssal the Mercenary. And then there's Flower here, and that's pretty much it. So you'll probably end up with plenty left over by the end of the playthrough. And we also picked up a hat at Leroy. Unfortunately, it was not the one I was hoping for, the Laurel Crown. I was hoping to double our bonuses versus the coming bosses, but I didn't feel like grinding hats out. The Tricorn is a decent enough hat in its own right. It cuts down the cooldown time for assists in half, which is useful. So, the Doombringer. I mentioned that it could be succinctly described as a demonic rocket launcher. And really, I'm not sure how better to describe it even if I were to go more verbose, more in-depth. I'm not sure there's too much else I could say. The light attack combo is, as always, a series of pistol shots where you have to reload after firing all of them. The heavy attack, which is the unique thing, is a rocket launcher shot, a mortar shot, if you will, where you fire a number of doom shots, the number depending on how far you've upgraded the weapon. Currently, we get 3. Oh, and cutting away from that topic for a second here, just to discuss Shanafi for a brief bit. If you paid attention during the credit sequence when we finished Reyna's playthrough, you may have noticed that 3 people were credited for contributing this character. And if you paid attention to their names, you may have noticed that a part of each of their names is what formed this character's name. And I really like that, especially since it goes along with the fact that this is a character that seems to be multiple beings at once. They use the royal we after all. And I really like that just because it's a bit more creative than most backer characters are in these sorts of projects. A composite character for a multitude of people, rather than just your average random OC. I like it. Oh, and that nice little detail there of there actually being a clump of ice crystals, which looks similar to the base of the ice pillars that you create, suggesting perhaps that Valdis himself used ice magic to get up here. Anyway, this time we have plenty of money to afford his services, and so we are immediately going to do so. He is, in my opinion, the best assist in the game. And eventually here I end up checking out exactly what he's about. Yeah, so he does a single powerful slash, one attack, that penetrates armor. I don't know if it ignores only a portion of defense or all of it, but it ignores a significant amount. Now, the damage at base isn't all that amazing. We only ended up doing around 80 to those armored creatures. Significant enough that it's clearly still ignoring their high defenses, but not enough to be especially noteworthy. The thing is, as its description stated, his slash's damage builds the higher your combo is. And if you can get your combo up into 30 plus, you can end up doing several thousands of damage with him. And given the fact that he only has a 12 or so second cooldown, it's pretty good damage output. Useful for, say, finishing off a boss right as they enter their final phase. That's what I like using him for. Or just dealing a whole bunch of damage to a mini-boss enemy, perhaps even one-shotting them. Cutting ahead here to the spider to show off just that, in fact. Valdis got the kill, good job buddy. And we get a level up for our troubles. 1 point into luck, and then at this point we have everything we especially want out of the 100 Demon Arm and Sentry trees. So since we are making good use of our firearms now, we're gonna start investing in Marksman. There are some really good skills there, even if you only plan on somewhat using the firearms. In fact, there's even some skills I think that don't even necessarily need the firearms to be useful. So it's a pretty good tree to invest in for any build, if you have a few extra skill points lying around. Anyway, there's not much else of interest here in the Ziggurat, so let's skip right ahead to Gernot. Gernot. Still not entirely sure how you're supposed to pronounce Mr. Goat Knight here's name. Well, he's a real peach, so it doesn't matter too much if we disrespect him like that. And not to spoil too much, but the fight ahead is something of a reversal of the situation we had when we played as Reyna. If you recall, we clowned on him so hard that he didn't even get a chance to show off his gimmick. I think at the time I actually addressed what that was. Fortunately, this time we do. Even though we have some pretty powerful light-aligned magic in the form of this Ice Spell Soul here, we still don't have good enough damage output to avoid that gimmick. That doesn't mean we necessarily have a difficult time, especially since you can see the main advantage of using ice magic with a high affliction chance. You can stun bosses for so long that they basically don't get a chance to attack at all, or in the case here, have their attacks greatly reduced in frequency. But yeah, if you let Gernot's MP build up enough, he'll end up doing this super attack of sorts. Now, in addition to dealing with his attacks, you also have to avoid all sorts of beams and projectiles that are spawning without his direct action. It's one of the more bullet-helly boss sequences in the game, and given the boss room's small size, it can be very difficult avoiding all of this damage. Add on to the fact that our life leech is largely cancelled out by the Jester Watch's damage, and if we take damage, it's pretty much permanent. And that's the reason why this first attempt here is ultimately a failure, at least for my purposes. We get close, but he gets in that one extra hit right at the end. Eventually. It'll happen soon enough. There we go. Forcing us to use a health potion and counting this attempt as null. After all, I am going to get an overall S rank for every boss fight, even if I have to spend hours doing so. Fortunately, that is not at all the case here, as you'll see with this second attempt going so much more smoothly than the first. It actually speeds by quick enough that I'll abstain from commenting over the rest of it. You can just enjoy. So yeah, a much more successful second attempt at the fight. It was kind of amazing just how much damage Kudir managed to do. I guess Gano must not have all that high fire resistance, at least for a demon. He managed to take out like a quarter of his health, which was way more than I ever would have expected. I mainly used it to stun him for a little bit, and thus halting the progress of his mana meter. That's one of the things you can use focus finishes for on this type of boss. But yeah, he's dead, and now we have our Void Soul, which you'd think would be useful for us, especially since we seem to like demonic magic, but not really. For void damage, our Void Arm and our minions are good enough for that. And I don't feel like wasting the materials on another Spell Soul, so we'll be relegating it purely for movement. Such as for acquiring this item here at the Ziggurat's entrance, pointing it out because it is so useful for a mage, another Spell Lantern. Don't miss it. But yeah, that's our business with the Ziggurat concluded, so let's head back to Hrak, and finally max out our chosen armor, the Murderous Raiment. We're probably going to be using this for the rest of the game, if only because I don't feel like upgrading any other armor sets at this point. Maybe if I have the extra materials, I'll try out one or another. But this is what we'll be mainlining. Increased critical chance, extra magic damage after performing a critical hit, good synergy with what we're doing with this build. So, next destination to actually make use of that poison elixir we purchased now quite a while ago, at least in terms of relative time, is the Tainted Laboratory. We might as well do it now and see if that demon assassin can't at least be somewhat of a threat if we come here early enough. And on the way, picking up useful items as always. I'm of course picking up everything I remember, but only showing off the especially noteworthy ones. These Warlock vestments would be an especially good choice if we were going pure magic, as opposed to the luck hybrid sort of build that we're doing. If we were focusing on int, that's probably what I would have gone with, at least for demonically aligned armors. So here we are at the Tainted Laboratory. It's just as annoying as it was when we did it as Reyna. Not difficult per se, but just the omnipresence of poison is not at all fun to deal with. Even if the deleterious effects are nullified, we still have to deal with the fact that it's covering the screen with an ugly green hue that not only looks terrible, but also somewhat obscures projectiles and thus makes it difficult to avoid taking damage. Add on to that the not endlessly respawning, but nearly so enemies in these platforming segments that before, though I had no trouble with, now I do, and we have an area that I'm just like kind of done with. Yeah, if you fail that one in particular for that one treasure chest that you can get to in the next room if you take the secret exit, you basically have to go all the way back around for another attempt. And of course, going for this period, whether you succeed or fail, locks you off from the topmost treasure chest in the save room, which contains one of the pieces of Tamahagane, so forcing you to go for yet another run through. It's just a very circuitous area and it's not enjoyable at all. So we're skipping the rest of it. let's get straight to Ragano, the famed assassin of the demonic army. Let's see how he fares against Vladyn. You'll notice that I've switched out the Doombringer for the long gun. The Doombringer is still pretty solid, but overall, the sheer range and freezing potential of the long gun makes it more useful for this fight in particular. Ragano as an assassin is really only dangerous close up with his daggers causing bleed. So if you stay at a distance and just fire your rifle, he can't really do much. In fact, as I figured out midway through the fight, if you alternate your heavy shots with the slightly quicker pistol strikes, you can basically just completely shut him down. Just stun lock him and prevent him from ever actually scoring off an attack. And it kind of makes him even more pathetic than when we fought him as Vayner, if that can possibly be believed. Since I won't ever be showing this off in the course of my LP, one really funny thing about this fight is that if you come here as Gilda, she makes it very clear that he's not famous at all. He's just some random grunt who's basically taken up airs, who is pretending to be more skilled and more well-renowned than he actually is. And Gilda just straight up calls him out on his bullshit, and it's pretty great. Anyway, at this point, thankfully, we're pretty much done with poison for the rest of the game. Unless I actually go back to the abandoned gardens or the tainted laboratory for some reason to farm enemies, which I don't think I'll need to, and I won't show that off on camera. We shouldn't ever fight any enemies that use poison. Which I say thank God to. It's not a fun status effect to deal with. It's kind of the trouble, I suppose, of making it a useful status effect, is that when it ends up getting used against you, it ends up being more of a pain in the ass than it usually is. I think though the fact that it's just as useful for you to use against the enemies though does make up for it. At least a little bit. Anyway, that's about all of interest there is in the garden here. The last item of note being another piece of the armor of the Grey Knight, which we kind of can't use since everyone in the execution hall is kinda dead, so we can't make use of Mitzi's services, alas. So let's get along to our last destination for today, the Engineer's Palace. An area and boss that we had a fair amount of trouble with as Vayner, but in a reverse of that scenario, again, we have a much easier time with as Vladyn. The fact that we have such a powerful, dark-aligned weapon certainly doesn't hurt matters. I kinda left off on discussing the Doombringer before, so let's get back to talking about it. Unlike the other weapons, the shotgun and the long gun, which have more of a cooldown after you fire them, thanks to their reloading animation, this one has more of a cool up animation. I know there's another term to refer to that, but I can't remember what it is at the moment. But the heavy attack of this takes longer to fire than any of the other firearms, and that means you have to time your uses of it more accurately. If you just fire it willy-nilly, you're basically begging to be hit by the enemies, which you want to avoid, especially during boss fights where you're especially harshly judged on that. So with the shotgun and long gun, my usage of it was basically just repeatedly jumping and spamming heavy attack. With the Doombringer, you actually want to work in pistol shots more often, because pistol shots are much quicker, they don't have that cool up animation, and they're just as good at stunning most enemies. The damage isn't the most amazing, at least compared to the Doom shots themselves, but if say you can stun an enemy and prevent it from attacking you, thus gaining the time to do a Doom shot with impunity, well, you're gonna be much better off. Now, before we proceed onward to fight Trey, we're going to switch up our magic a little bit. We're bringing back the boys for one more reunion tour. If you recall, one of the elements of this fight that I pointed out as being especially annoying is that Treyu himself is quite mobile. He likes warping around the screen and just generally moving quickly, and basically forcing you to chase after him in order to do damage, especially when he does his teleport away and start firing off lightning beams. As Vladyn, you can make this much less of an issue if you make use of your minions, as we'll see when the fight eventually starts. I feel like Trey's monologue here is even longer than it was as when we were playing as Vayner. Golden child nothing, they should call you talkative child, jeesh. You're gonna kill me with boredom here. Finally, there we go, his lawful good screed is done. So yeah, immediately you'll notice that with our Doombringer we are doing a ridiculous amount of damage. A nice side effect of using the proper element versus the proper enemy. Someone brought up that when I mentioned that he seems resistant to arcane damage, divine damage, that he probably wasn't, he was probably just normally resistant to that. And that may be the case, but there is a world of difference between a damage type that an enemy is normally resistant to, and one they are quite weak to, as we're seeing here. But yeah, as I alluded to, your minions make these phases so much easier because they can just go ahead of you and deal with them for you. As can our good old friend Kudir. Sadly, that did not finish Trey off, so we're gonna have to do that ourselves. Nope, but it seems that our side summon wants to get in some last pain as well. Can't really blame him for that. Trey is the smug enough kind of jerk that you can't just help but want to punch him in the face. So I guess providing the tat for Trey's tit, Vladyn here is gonna monologue for a while himself, while Trey is on death's door. You can pause the video and read that if you so desire. I'm gonna mostly ignore it though, just to discuss a much more interesting topic. So, the Doombringer that we've been making such good use of this entire video, it wasn't always in the game. And I'm not just saying that because Vladyn wasn't added until a later patch. No, when Vladyn was first added to the game, he didn't possess the Doombringer. His dark-aligned weapon was a different one called the Ruinous Edge. A later patch replaced it with the Doombringer. The reason being that the Ruinous Edge was kind of massively overpowered. Or so I'm told. I never actually played as Vladyn before they removed it, so I've never got the chance to test it out. And I've yet to find any YouTube videos showing it off, not that I've searched especially exhaustively for it. But yeah, not only was it apparently massively overpowered, but it didn't really play well with any of Vladyn's trees either. Even though it was a throwing weapon, it wasn't a firearm per se, so it wasn't affected by any of the skills in the marksman tree. And it didn't have any special skills affecting it in either the Sentry or 100 Demon Arm trees. So it kind of existed in a separate state in its own sort of limbo. So you have a weapon that doesn't really play well with the character growth, and yet is still strong enough in its own right to be arguably the most powerful thing in the game. At least again, that's what I've seen it referred to as. And apparently it was a nightmarish enough of a scenario that the developers basically just said fuck it, and replaced it with an entirely new weapon, the Doombringer. One that would actually work with his pre-established skill trees. Case in point, the skill that we just picked up boosts the damage of the heavy attack of each of our firearm pairs. The shotgun, the rifle, and the rocket launcher. And given the fact that they had to create entirely new art assets for this new weapon, even if it's not a huge amount, means that it's not necessarily the easier of the two paths. The devs just happen to choose the lesser trod path, and I'm not going to fault them for that choice. Especially with how much fun I do have with the Doombringer. Though that said, I do still wish the Ruinous Edge was in the game in some form, maybe if only as a cheat you could enable in the options. But yeah, that's the history of the Doombringer for you, and that's all we have time for today. So, we put it off long enough. Next time, we'll have to talk to Sezzy.